Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraad, bringing you the podcast, Capitalism Hits Home, a podcast that deals with the mutual shaping of economic life, political life, cultural life, and personal life in the United States. It's brought to you by Democracy at Work. Today, I want to talk about the recent phenomenon of mass rapes as a preoccupation in American news, because there have been quite a few of them, and one wonders why they're discussed. I'm sure there were mass rapes before, but now they're actually being discussed because I think the Me Too movement and the power of women, both economically and politically, has brought up rape. And as Giselle Pellicot said when the news, some lawyer, she said this and it was covered in the news, a lawyer for one of the men who raped her started questioning her sex life. And she said, "You're just trying to bait me. This is not about sex. This is about rape. They're very different." And I think that that's very important, her distinction. The cases that I'll talk about, which are cases in point, are the case of Giselle Pellicot in France, Alan Oren and Tal Alexander in Miami and elsewhere, Sean Puff Daddy Combs in the United States, and Michael Jeffries, former CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch, and his two buddies, Matthew Smith and James Jacobson, in New York City and elsewhere. First, I'll talk about the Giselle Pellicot case and briefly summarize it for people who haven't been as drawn to it and as well read about it as I have been. Giselle Pellicot's case riveted France and elsewhere. She's a 72-year-old woman in a small town in France, and for just about a decade, she was drugged by her husband, who invited men to rape her inert body. He videotaped those rapes. That's why they have 50 men on trial, because out of the between 70 and more, 86 men who raped her at her husband's invitation, only 50 have their faces visible so that they can be found and accused. During that time, Dominique Pellicot, Giselle's husband of 50 years, accompanied her from doctor to doctor to try to understand why she had such memory lapses and why she had such acute pelvic pain. He was very sympathetic and showed no indication that he was responsible. In the US, Alain and Tal Alexander, who are luxury real estate brokers and very rich, gang raped women. They'd invite them to barbecues and parties and then drug them or hold them down violently while they raped them. The former CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch, Michael Jeffries, along with Matthew Smith and James Jacobson, drugged young men. They would give them drugs that wiped them out in terms of their resistance, but Viagra, so their penises would continue to stand up, and then committed multiple rapes. The reason they got these young men to go to their parties is that the CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch was in charge of the modeling for Abercrombie and Fitch, and these young men were aspiring models. Why are people finally doing this? Why are they announcing that they were raped and transferring the shame that used to be accorded to rape victims into rage. It's very interesting because Bill Cosby was known to have drugged and sexually assaulted women for many years. But it wasn't until 2014 that that was even publicly acknowledged and persecuted. And that was only because Hannibal Buress, who was a stand-up comedian, had some lines as part of his stand-up where he said, "You're the worst I've ever seen, Bill Cosby. You're so self-satisfied." That was the message. Telling black men, pull up your pants. Well, as he said, just because you were on TV, you can't talk down to me. Yeah, and this is the quotation, but you raped women, Bill Cosby, so turn your crazy down a couple of notches. Now, the fact that Bill Cosby sexually assaulted women for many years was a kind of half-known fact in the entertainment industry, just as Harvey Weinstein's prolific rapes were a fact kind of known in the entertainment industry, but nobody called them out because calling out a rapist who's powerful was frightening to people. And their victims carried shame rather than organized their rage. And shame is a very, very important weapon. In capitalism, you shame the poor for being poor while you glorify the rich. Trump likes to trumpet, "I'm rich," and he has as his cohort in a bromance Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, who's there because of his money. He's certainly not elected by anyone and doesn't have any government qualifications, but he's a multi-billionaire, the richest man in the world. Well, you can't really have compassion and empathy for other people if you're that rich, because you usually get rich by exploiting other people. You hire them, and of course, it doesn't pay to hire them unless you give them less than they earn back for you. So you're ripping them off, and you can't feel too sorry for them if the ethos in capitalism is get as much as you can and pay them as little as you can get away with. And one of the ways you can get away with it is make them ashamed that they don't have money. Shame is a tool both of patriarchy and also capitalism. And the opposite of shame, anger, is forbidden. An angry worker doesn't have the same connotations as something positive and wonderful. The angry woman is portrayed as someone to fear and someone very unseemly. Angry black men are considered in very poor taste. It's one of the reasons Obama was so consistently calm. He was avoiding the stereotype of the angry black man. But anger is what you need to escape shame and not to be a tool of the powerful upper class. When workers and women of color and the poor toss their shame and instead tap into their anger, change can happen. In the words of Frederick Douglass, you can't have a crop unless you turn over the soil. You can't make an omelet unless you break the egg. You have to break out and be angry. Capitalists use all of our shame at our bodies, shame at our appearance, shame at our poverty, and they use it to push us to buy their goods. We're ashamed that our bodies are too heavy. We have to go on diets that we pay for and buy special foods. We're not healthy enough. We have to pay for wellness centers. We're not man enough if you're men. So you have to buy testosterone creams or guns as penis extenders. All oppressed people are taught to be ashamed of themselves because shame is internalized anger. You're not rich enough. You got to blame yourself. You should be ashamed of yourself. You made bad decisions. As if everyone doesn't make bad decisions. But some people don't suffer for them. So, for example, Trump has 6 bankruptcies for the bad business decisions he made. But since his father gave him $214 million to start with, that hasn't cost him. When shame turns into rage, you organize, you strike, and you make change, which is very important. When people turn their shame into anger, they take over their businesses and they turn them into co-ops, where they decide what to produce, how to produce it, and how to allocate the profits among all of them. One of the reasons that it's all males who rape is an interesting one. The most humiliating and helpless times in everyone's lives are when we're very little and we need people to take care of our bodies so we stay alive, to feed us, to clothe us, to watch us. And these are all women because childcare is female, because it's poorly paid and associated with women's nurturing role. At least in the United States, it's very poorly paid. Barely more than parking lot attendants or people who watch children. So men's most humiliating experiences, their formative experiences, are at the hands of women. And they have a kind of suspicion of women and fear of women. And often it's women who reject them and their body's sexual needs so that they want to get revenge on women. Another reason it's all men, well, it's physiological, but people could coerce sex if they were women, and they don't anywhere near the amount of time that men coerce sex, is that the rapist discharges his shame at his need for women, because the male stereotype is that you're in charge, that you don't need anybody, that you don't have the vulnerable feelings of needing a hug and needing to be just held and needing to be comforted. The one need that men and boys are encouraged to have is the need for sex. Boys' other needs are not encouraged. When my daughter had a sleepover of one of her friends, we didn't have 2 beds in their rooms, so they slept together. When my son had a friend, one of them slept on the floor because it was considered gay, in the awful words of their parlance, that you were a faggot if you were in bed with another boy on a sleepover. And you weren't supposed to hug each other either, or put your arm around each other in America. The only allowable physical need is sex for men. I had a client who was a salesman who went along across the United States selling the product of his company, and he would get so lonely that he would hire a prostitute, because they stayed at the Holiday Inns where the prostitutes were available, just to have somebody in bed. And that's not unusual. I remember reading that more than half of the hiring of prostitutes is just to have them lie with you and sleep with you. And so that if the two emotions that are allowed to men are anger and aggression, and the need that's allowed within that male stereotype is the need for sex, then men's fury at their neediness can be taken out on women. They can use sex as a punishment of women primarily, but also of other men. They vanquish their male need through their penises. But then rape has happened ever since religion has happened. It's very interesting. In a book called The Mothers by Robert Briffaut, he talks about how there was no rape, I think it was in the island of Fiji, till the missionaries got there and made people ashamed of their bodies and ashamed of their sexual needs. Another reason that this is coming up now, although it has been around ever since religion has, that shame and rape, is that men no longer have uncontested male supremacy because of the women's movement. They lost that power to dominate women in the late 1970s. For example, until the 1970s, in every state in the United States, men were allowed to rape their wives. In all 50 states. Marital rape stopped being legal in 1993, although it was far more tolerated in the courts than other kinds of rape. The Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women required all the countries that joined it in Europe to ratify it. And part of it was to make it illegal to rape your wife. Sex had to be consensual. That conference and that particular requirement only came into being in 1914, the year that Hannibal Buress brought up Bill Cosby's predations. And actually, instead of that disappearing as a known joke, it was picked up and Bill Cosby started to be arrested for sexual abuse. Rape and control over women and control over women's bodies is something that men no longer have. They also don't have the economic control they used to. Although men make more money than women do, 82%. Women make 82% of what men earn. However, women now have jobs. Women are the majority in America in all aspects of education except the most highly rewarded STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. But women can now support ourselves, particularly if we don't have children, and only about half of American women want children now, whereas before the 70s, about 90% wanted children. What happened? Well, it's very interesting that capitalism is what wrecked this for men, because capitalists found it far more profitable to outsource jobs to China, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, where they could pay half the salaries, no benefits, and they didn't have ecological constraints, and they could manage those businesses via computer, fax, and other machines. What has changed is that women no longer feel shame if they're single. It used to be that a single woman was branded an old maid, a truly negative connotation, whereas single men were referred to as bachelors, a kind of romantic allocation. Now women are thought of as independent women, not old maids. A particularly sinister aspect of capitalism is the need to exploit workers, but also to exploit everyone else in your life. In the Pellicot case, Dominique Pellicot exploited his wife of 50 years' trust in him while he drugged her and invited men to rape her. He couldn't have any empathy. And one of the things Giselle Pellicot said after seeing these 50 videos of men raping her inert body, often while she was snoring, she thought, I wasn't a person. I wasn't a human. And they say that feminism's definition is seeing that women are fully human with all the capacities that human beings can have. And that's something that is contested in the patriarchal system. Now, what do we do about it? What can we do, and what are people doing to change this? Well, in France and across all the Scandinavian countries and in Holland, they have changed sex education. So it begins in kindergarten, when you talk about all the good feelings you have when you're holding hands, when you're hugging, when you lean against one another. Those are nice feelings, and you talk about your feelings. You also talk about how flowers don't reproduce unless the bee comes and mixes the pollen from one flower to another, from the male part of the flower to the female part of the flower. And that's how plants can keep growing. And you can get new plants. So they start normalizing as part of the world and part of nature reproduction. And they also link sex to tenderness and comfort. By the time they get to high school, well, in junior high, they talk about the changes in male and female bodies, how our bodies change in order to be able to produce children, and in women's case, feed children as well. And both boys and girls learn about this. And then in high school, after junior high, they learn about sexual feelings and their responsibilities to their partners and themselves to bring pleasure to the other person. And if they produce a child, what responsibility they have to that little life, which is very, very different from United States sexual education, which is only biologically correct in 17 states and is never about feelings and emotions and relationships. Another thing that we can do is what they do in Swedish nursery schools. They don't use male and female pronouns. Instead of saying his, they say Jimmy's or Joe's, hers, Giselle's or Monique's, that they use gender as attributes as little as possible, and they encourage their children to play with the toys that are gender neutral or that are usually associated with an opposite gender. Those things really help. They don't have the rates of rape that we do. Now, what can we do about it on a bigger scale? Well, what we could do is what they have done in France recently in the New Left Front movement, which has united immigrant rights, progressive unions, LGBTQIA groups, their Arab rights and Black Lives Matter type movements, climate movements, and all the movements for social justice around a basic pillar of class transformation so that the money can be invested in changing these blights on society and helping every group that's involved. With the feeling that we need each other, we have to get together, because if we all get together, we can win. And the emphasis is not, I'm white, you're not white, I'm a woman, you're a man, and so on. It's we need each other, whoever we are. One of the things that Martin Luther King said when he was addressing the Longshoremen's Union, he said the best way to get justice is unions. Because in unions, fights around your economic well-being, everyone's involved together because we all need each other. And that kind of a movement, I think, can win here as it did in Chile, as it did in Mexico, as it did in France. A unity of all people who care about equality, kindness, protection, and economic well-being. Thank you. Until next time.